You meet someone amazing. The chemistry is instant, the conversation flows, and for the first time in months, maybe years, you feel that spark of genuine connection. You exchange numbers, you text back and forth, and everything seems to be moving in the right direction. Then something happens. Maybe you forget to respond to a text for 3 days. Maybe you get so absorbed in a project that you miss the subtle cues that she wanted to meet up again. Maybe you say something completely honest that comes across as too intense too soon. And just like that, the connection fizzles out. You tell yourself it wasn't meant to be, that the timing was off, that she probably wasn't right for you anyway. But deep down, you know there's a pattern here. This isn't the first time it's happened. It's not even the 10th time. You've been single for 2 years now, maybe 3, maybe longer, and everyone around you keeps asking why. Your family wonders why such a smart, capable guy can't seem to hold down a relationship. Your friends joke about you being married to your work or your hobbies. Women you meet seem interested at first, then drift away without explanation. And you're left wondering what the hell you keep doing wrong. Here's what nobody tells you. The reason ADHD men stay single for years has almost nothing to do with being unlovable, boring, or fundamentally flawed. It has everything to do with a specific set of neurological differences that create a perfect storm of relationship obstacles that neurotypical people simply don't face. The cruelest part is that these obstacles are mostly invisible. Nobody sees them. Nobody understands them. And because they're invisible, people attribute your singleness to things that aren't true. They think you're too picky. They think you're not trying hard enough. They think you have commitment issues or emotional unavailability problems. But the real issue is so much more complex and so much more exhausting than any of those surface-level explanations. The real issue is that your brain is running an entirely different operating system in a dating world that was designed exclusively for Windows users, and nobody bothered to write you a compatibility patch. Let's start with the initial attraction phase, because this is where things actually go right for you. And understanding why they go right here helps explain why they go wrong later. When you first meet someone you're genuinely interested in, your ADHD brain lights up like a Christmas tree. This is novelty, this is stimulation. This is exactly the kind of dopamine-rich experience your brain craves. You're funny, you're engaged, you're asking questions, you're making connections between ideas that make you seem creative and interesting. You're hyper-focused on this person in a way that feels incredibly flattering to them. They're thinking, wow, this guy really listens. This guy really sees me. This guy is different from all the others who seem distracted or playing games. And they're right, you are different. In this moment, you're the most attentive, present, engaged version of yourself. The problem is that this version of you is being powered by novelty, and novelty doesn't last. Fast forward 2 weeks, a month, maybe 2 months if you're really working at it. The relationship is no longer new. Your brain is no longer getting that same dopamine hit from every interaction. She's no longer a fascinating mystery to unravel. She's become familiar. And here's where your ADHD brain does something that looks like loss of interest, but isn't actually loss of interest at all. Your brain starts requiring the same amount of effort to maintain focus on the relationship that neurotypical brains require to, learn advanced calculus. Suddenly, remembering to text back feels like trying to remember to file your taxes. Planning a date requires the same executive function as organizing a corporate merger. Staying emotionally present during a conversation after a long day at work feels like running a marathon on no sleep. And the woman you're dating has no framework for understanding this. All she knows is that the guy who was so attentive and engaged has seemingly transformed into someone who's distant, forgetful, and seemingly not that interested anymore. You want to know what makes this even more complicated? You're still interested. That's the part that tortures you. You genuinely like her. You think about her. You want this to work. But your brain has basically said, sorry, we're no longer releasing the good chemicals for this activity, so you're going to have to manually operate everything now. It's like going from driving an automatic transmission to driving a stick shift, except nobody told you about the clutch and you keep stalling out at every intersection. You forget to text. Not because you don't care, but because your working memory is a broken filing cabinet where important things just disappear into a void. You show up late or forget plans entirely. Not because she's not a priority, but because time blindness means that 15 minutes feels like 5 minutes, and suddenly you're an hour late, and you don't even understand how it happened. You interrupt her stories or seem like you're not listening. Not because you're dismissive, but because your brain is processing 12 different thoughts simultaneously, and sometimes your mouth starts talking before your filter catches up. Here's the thing that neurotypical people really struggle to grasp. For you, maintaining a relationship during the post-novelty phase requires conscious, deliberate effort for things that happen automatically for other people. Neurotypical people don't have to set phone reminders to text their partner. Their brain just naturally generates the impulse to reach out. Neurotypical people don't have to create elaborate systems to remember anniversaries and important dates. Their memory just files that information in an accessible place. Neurotypical people don't have to fight their own neurology to stay present during a conversation about their partner's day. They just listen, naturally, without their mind wandering to 17 other topics. You're over here running a full-time management operation, just to do the basic maintenance that keeps a relationship functional. And you're doing it while also trying to manage a job, a household, your own mental health, and everything else life throws at you. It's exhausting. And eventually, one of two things happens. Either you burn out from the effort and the relationship falls apart, or she gets tired of what looks like lack of investment and ends things herself. Let's talk about the rejection sensitivity piece, because this is the part that keeps you single even longer than the relationship maintenance issues do. You know what happens after you've been through this cycle a few times? After you've had 3, 4, 5 relationships end with some variation of "you're great, but," or "I don't feel like you're really invested," or "I need someone who's more present," you develop an absolutely crippling fear of rejection that makes initiating new connections feel like voluntarily walking into emotional gunfire. And ADHD brains don't experience rejection like neurotypical brains do. Rejection-sensitive dysphoria is real, and it's brutal. When a neurotypical person faces rejection, they feel disappointed. When you face rejection, your brain interprets it as a fundamental confirmation that you're defective, unlovable, and destined to be alone. It's not rational. It's not proportional. But it's what your nervous system does with that information. So now you're stuck in this impossible situation. You know from experience that relationships are incredibly difficult for you to maintain. You know that the initial attraction phase will eventually give way to the executive function nightmare phase. You know that your pattern has been to disappoint people who started out really liking you. And your rejection-sensitive brain says, "You know what? Let's just not try. Let's stay safe. Let's avoid the whole thing." And this is where people on the outside see a guy who's not putting himself out there and assume it's because you're not interested in a relationship, or you're too comfortable being alone, or you're still hung up on an ex. They don't see the fear. They don't see the pattern recognition your brain has done that says this always ends badly. They don't see you lying awake at night wanting connection, but being terrified of the inevitable failure that your track record suggests is coming. If this is hitting close to home, do me a favor and hit that like button, because this is the stuff nobody else is talking about. This is the reality behind why so many intelligent, interesting, genuinely good men with ADHD end up single for years despite wanting partnership. And we're just getting started. The communication piece is where things get really messy, because this is where your ADHD traits get misinterpreted as character flaws in ways that are incredibly damaging. Let's paint a specific picture. You're a month into dating someone. Things are going reasonably well. She texts you about something that's bothering her at work. It's clearly important to her. She's venting, she's frustrated, she needs support. Your ADHD brain does what ADHD brains do. It immediately starts problem solving. You see the pattern in what she's describing. You recognize the solution. You care about her, so you want to help, so you offer advice. Detailed advice. Maybe you get a little carried away explaining the solution, because once your brain latches onto a problem, It wants to fully explore it. You send 3 or 4 texts laying out exactly what she could do to fix the situation. You think you're being supportive. You think you're showing that you care enough to really think through her problem. She thinks you're being condescending. She thinks you're not listening to her emotional experience. She thinks you're trying to fix her instead of just being there for her. And when she expresses this, you're completely blindsided. You were trying to help. How did trying to help become this thing you did wrong? But here's what was actually happening. She needed emotional attunement. She needed someone to reflect her feelings back to her, validate her frustration, sit with her in the discomfort. That's what neurotypical communication often prioritizes. The emotional exchange, the social bonding, the I see you and I'm with you of it all. But your brain skipped right past all of that to the practical solution, because that's how ADHD brains often work. You're wired to identify patterns, solve problems, move to action. The emotional processing step that neurotypical people naturally include. Your brain sometimes treats that as optional pre-processing that can be skipped to get to the main event faster. This happens over and over in different forms. She wants to tell you about her day, with all the details and social dynamics and emotional nuances. Your brain is screaming, "What's the point? What's the conclusion? Why are we spending 15 minutes on what Susan said to Rebecca in the break room?" You don't mean to be dismissive. You're just literally struggling to understand why this information is being shared at this length. She wants to have a deep conversation about where the relationship is going. Your brain needs processing time, needs to think through all the variables, needs to not be put on the spot for something this important. But to her, your hesitation looks like uncertainty about her. Lack of enthusiasm, emotional distance. She shares something vulnerable and pauses, waiting for you to reciprocate. Your brain doesn't naturally track that. Now it's your turn for vulnerability. You might say something supportive but not equally vulnerable, and she feels like there's an imbalance, like she's more invested than you are. The literal thinking piece makes all of this worse. She says, "We should do something fun this weekend." You hear that as a general nice idea and file it away as a possibility. She meant that as let's make specific plans right now for a specific thing. She says, "I'm fine." In that tone, that means I'm absolutely not fine and I need you to ask me what's wrong. You hear the words "I'm fine" and think, okay, she's fine, and you move on. She tells you about someone hitting on her at the gym, and she's sharing this to gauge your reaction, to see if you care, to feel reassured about your interest in her. You hear it as just information being conveyed and respond with something like, "Huh, that's weird," because you're taking the story at face value. She needed jealousy, or at least increased attention, or some indication that you view her as your partner who you'd be upset about losing. You gave her a bland acknowledgement because you didn't see the subtext. Neurotypical communication is absolutely loaded with subtext, implied meanings, social scripts, and unspoken expectations. ADHD brains, especially when they're already managing attention and executive function challenges, often miss these layers entirely. You're playing checkers while everyone else is playing three-dimensional chess, and then people act like you're being deliberately obtuse when you don't make moves you didn't even know were possible. The worst part is that this gets interpreted as not caring. Your ex tells her friends, "He just never really got me. He didn't care enough to understand what I needed." But you did care. You cared intensely. You just didn't have the decoder ring for the language she was speaking, and she didn't realize she was speaking a different language in the first place. Now, let's add the emotional regulation component, because this is where things go from difficult to potentially explosive. You've probably noticed that your emotions don't work like other people's emotions. When you're happy, you're not just happy, you're exuberant. When you're interested in something, you're not just interested, you're obsessed. And when you're upset, frustrated, or hurt, you don't just feel upset. You feel it with an intensity that can be overwhelming even to you, let alone to someone else watching it happen. This is emotional hyperarousal, and it's a core feature of ADHD that nobody warns you about when it comes to relationships. Here's how this plays out. You have a disagreement with someone you're dating. Maybe it's small. Maybe she made a comment that hit a sore spot. Maybe she canceled plans last minute, and your rejection sensitivity interpreted that as she doesn't actually like me. Your emotional response is immediate and intense. You might get visibly upset in a way that seems disproportionate to the situation. You might shut down completely and withdraw because the emotion is too big to process in the moment. You might say something harsh because your filter isn't working when you're flooded with feeling. And she's sitting there thinking, why are you making such a big deal out of this? Why can't you just have a normal disagreement like a normal person? What she doesn't understand is that your nervous system just went from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds, and you don't have the neurological brake system to slow that down. The flip side is just as problematic. Sometimes your emotional response is delayed. She tells you something that should probably generate an emotional reaction, something vulnerable or important, and you just kind of don't react much. Not because you don't care, but because your brain needs time to process what you just heard. The emotional response will come later, maybe hours later, maybe when you're alone and your brain finally has the space to unpack what that information means. But in the moment, your muted reaction looks like indifference. It looks like you don't care about her feelings. It looks like emotional unavailability. She's thinking, I just told him something really important, and he barely reacted. Meanwhile, you're going to be up at 2 in the morning feeling intense emotions about what she told you, but by then she's already decided that you're not emotionally invested enough. This emotional intensity and unpredictability makes you afraid of your own reactions. You start wondering if you're too much. You start worrying that your emotions are going to scare people away. And sometimes they do. Because when you've been single for years, when you finally meet someone you really like, the stakes feel enormous. Your emotional investment ramps up fast. Your fear of losing this connection is intense, and that intensity can manifest in ways that push people away. You might want to see her more than she's ready for. You might need more reassurance than feels reasonable to her. You might have a harder time playing it cool, because your brain doesn't do cool. It does all in or mostly out, with not a lot of comfortable middle ground. Women sometimes describe this as clingy, or too intense too fast, and they back away. You're left feeling like your authentic emotional experience is fundamentally too much for people to handle. Let's talk about what happens with routines and structure, because this is another invisible relationship killer. Your ADHD brain needs routine and structure to function. Maybe you don't think of it that way. Maybe you think of yourself as spontaneous or flexible. But the truth is that you've probably built your life around certain patterns that help you manage your symptoms. You go to the gym at the same time. You have your productive hours when you can focus on work. You have your wind-down routine in the evening. You have the specific way you manage your space to minimize the executive function required to find things and get tasks done. These aren't preferences. These are adaptive strategies that your brain requires to operate at baseline functionality. Enter a relationship. Suddenly, someone else's schedule and needs and preferences are intersecting with your carefully constructed routine. She wants to meet up on Tuesday evening, which is when you normally do the laundry. Because if you don't do it Tuesday, it won't happen all week, and you'll run out of clean clothes. She wants you to come to her place, which means navigating a different space where you don't have your systems, and you'll probably forget something important. She wants to have a spontaneous weekend together, which sounds romantic but actually means throwing off your entire task management system, and you'll spend the following week trying to catch up on everything that didn't get done. You try to explain this, and you sound rigid. You sound like you're prioritizing laundry over her. You sound like you're not willing to be flexible for the relationship. But what's really happening is that your brain is doing cost-benefit analysis in real time. Neurotypical people can miss their Tuesday laundry and just do it Wednesday, and everything is fine. You miss Tuesday laundry and suddenly you're wearing a dirty shirt to an important meeting on Thursday because you forgot you were out of clean ones, and you didn't have time Wednesday because something else came up, and now you're spiraling about how you can't even manage basic adulting. Neurotypical people can spend a weekend at someone else's place and just deal with the slight inconvenience. You spend a weekend away from your systems and your executive function collapses. You forget to take your medication because it's not in your usual spot. You lose your keys 3 times because they're not on your designated hook. You get overwhelmed by the different environment and end up being irritable and checked out, which makes her feel like you don't actually enjoy spending time at her place. The routine disruption piece extends to social obligations too. She wants you to come to her friend's birthday party. Her family expects you at Sunday dinner. She's involved in activities and groups, and she wants you to be part of that world. And every single one of these things requires you to manage social performance, remember names and details, track conversations in group settings, regulate your attention when you're not particularly interested in the topic, suppress your impulse to check your phone when you're understimulated, and generally mask your ADHD traits for hours at a time. It's exhausting. Neurotypical partners don't understand why attending a birthday party feels like running an obstacle course. They think you're being antisocial. They think you don't care about the people who are important to them. They don't see the cognitive load you're managing just to appear normal in these settings. Time blindness deserves its own deep dive because this might be the single most relationship-damaging ADHD trait that nobody takes seriously. You know how this goes. You're supposed to meet her for dinner at 7. You start getting ready at 6:30 because 30 minutes should be plenty of time. Except you can't find your keys. Then you realize you need gas in the car. Then you hit traffic. You show up at 7:25 and she's furious. You apologize. You feel terrible. But you also don't fully understand how you miscalculated so badly. The truth is that your brain has absolutely no internal sense of time passing. 30 minutes and 10 minutes feel identical, until suddenly you're out of time, and you don't know where it went. This happens constantly in relationships. You tell her you'll call her later, and later in your mind is vague and flexible, but in her mind later means within the next few hours and when you call her 2 days later. Because that still feels like later to you, she feels disrespected and ignored. You say you need 5 more minutes to finish something before you can give her your attention, and 45 minutes pass without you noticing. And now she feels like you lied to her. You both agree to leave for an event by 6, and at 5:55 you genuinely believe you have plenty of time, even though you haven't showered yet. She's sitting there ready to go, watching you operate as if you have infinite time. And she's thinking, does he just not care that we're going to be late? Does he not respect my time or other people's time? You do care. You do respect her time. But your brain literally cannot accurately estimate how long tasks take or track how much time has passed. You live in a perpetual now where everything either happens now or doesn't exist yet. And the future, even the future 5 minutes from now, feels abstract and distant until suddenly it's the present and you're late again. This creates a pattern where you're constantly apologizing, constantly explaining, constantly promising to do better, and then constantly failing to do better because the issue isn't effort or care, it's neurology. She starts to feel like you can't be relied on. She stops believing your time estimates. She adds buffer time when she tells you when things start. She stops trusting that you'll follow through on time-sensitive commitments, and you're drowning in shame because you can't seem to fix this thing that everyone else seems to manage effortlessly. If you've been nodding along to all of this, if you're seeing your own patterns reflected back at you, drop a comment below and let me know which part hit hardest. Because I guarantee you're not alone in this, and sometimes just knowing other people get it makes the whole thing feel less isolating. The working memory issue compounds everything we've already talked about. Your working memory is like a desk that can only hold 2 or 3 items at a time, and anything else that comes in pushes something off the edge into oblivion. In a relationship context, this means you forget what she told you. Not because it wasn't important, not because you weren't listening in the moment, but because your brain didn't transfer that information from short-term to long-term storage. She mentions that she has a big presentation at work on Thursday. You're fully engaged in the conversation. You care about her success, you want to be supportive. Thursday comes and goes, and you don't ask her how it went. Because your brain released that information into the void somewhere between Tuesday and Thursday. She told you she doesn't like a particular restaurant because she had food poisoning there once. You suggest that exact restaurant 2 weeks later. She mentioned that her sister is going through a difficult divorce. You meet the sister at a family event and don't acknowledge it because you've completely forgotten that context. Each one of these memory failures looks like you don't care enough to remember. She starts to feel like she's not important enough to you for these things to stick. She stops sharing important information because what's the point if you're just going to forget anyway? You feel terrible every time you realize you've forgotten something significant. You try to write things down, but you forget to check your notes. You try to set reminders, but you've become blind to the 17 other reminders you've already swiped away. The harder you try to compensate for your working memory deficit, the more you realize how much your brain is just not built to retain this kind of interpersonal information in the way that relationships require. The cruelest part is that your memory is selective in ways that make you look even worse. You can remember incredibly specific details about your special interests. You can recall exact conversations from a podcast you heard 6 months ago. You can hold complex systems and frameworks in your mind with perfect clarity. But you can't remember that she told you she's allergic to shellfish. You can't remember that her mother's name is Patricia. You can't remember that Thursday is her late day at work, so she doesn't want to make plans that evening. The discrepancy between what you can remember and what you can't makes it look like a priorities problem. It looks like you remember what matters to you and forget what matters to her. But it's not about priorities. It's about what kind of information your brain decides to encode and what kind of information it treats as temporary data that can be discarded. Decision-making in relationships is another minefield. ADHD brains struggle with decision-making for several reasons. There's the analysis paralysis, where you can see too many options and variables, and you get stuck trying to evaluate all of them. There's the decision fatigue, where you've already made so many decisions today that your brain just refuses to make another one. There's the fear of making the wrong choice, especially when rejection sensitivity is in play. And there's the impulsivity, where sometimes you make big decisions without thinking them through, because your brain latches onto something that feels right in the moment. None of this combines well with relationship expectations. She asks where you want to go for dinner. Seems simple. It's not simple. Your brain immediately starts spinning up every possible option, trying to consider what she might like, what you're in the mood for, what's practical given the time and location, whether you've been to any place too recently, and on and on. You freeze. You say, "I don't know," wherever you want. She gets frustrated because she asked you to decide, and now you're putting it back on her. Or alternatively, your brain is just completely done making decisions after a long day, and the question feels like an impossible cognitive demand, and you get irritable about being asked to make yet another choice. She thinks you're being difficult. You're actually just running on an empty tank of decision-making capacity. Bigger decisions are even worse. She wants to talk about moving in together. Your brain needs time to process this. You need to think through all the implications. Consider how it would affect your routines. Manage your anxiety about change. Evaluate whether you're ready. But the time you need to process reads as ambivalence to her. It reads as you're not sure about her. She needs an answer now, or at least soon, and your brain is still 3 steps back trying to sort through the initial variables. Or the opposite happens. She mentions moving in together and your brain goes, "Yes, that sounds amazing." New relationship energy combined with impulsivity, and you're all in immediately without thinking through the practical implications. Then reality hits and you realize you committed to something you're not actually ready for, and now you're trapped between your impulsive yes and the reality of what that yes requires. The same pattern shows up in smaller relationship decisions. Should we make plans for next weekend? Should we be exclusive? Should you meet her parents? Do you want to go to that concert with her? Every decision point is either an agonizing evaluation process or an impulsive jump without adequate consideration. Neurotypical people can make these decisions with reasonable speed and reasonable thought. You're either paralyzed or reckless, with not much comfortable middle ground. She needs a partner who can engage in joint decision-making with a normal amount of deliberation and commitment. You're offering either total paralysis or impulsive enthusiasm, and neither one feels stable or reliable to her. Let's address the elephant in the room around sex and intimacy, because ADHD affects this too, in ways that are rarely discussed. The same attention regulation issues that affect every other area of your life show up here. Sometimes you're hyper-focused and intensely present, and it's great. Other times your mind is wandering and you're thinking about work or a problem you're trying to solve or literally anything else, and you're physically there but mentally checked out. You don't mean to be somewhere else. You don't find her unattractive. Your brain just does this thing where it wanders even during activities that should be engaging. She notices. Of course she notices. And she internalizes it as something wrong with her. Something about her not being enough to hold your attention. The sensory processing piece can make physical intimacy complicated too. Maybe certain touches or sensations are overwhelming in a way that's hard to articulate. Maybe you need specific conditions to be able to relax into intimacy, and if those conditions aren't met, you can't seem to get there. Maybe your arousal and desire patterns don't follow predictable paths, and that unpredictability feels confusing to both of you. Maybe you have periods of hypersexuality followed by periods where you're just not interested, and the inconsistency makes her wonder what's changed, what she did wrong, whether you're losing attraction to her. You're not losing attraction. Your ADHD is creating variability in your libido and engagement that has nothing to do with her but affects her directly. There's also the vulnerability factor. Intimacy requires being present, being vulnerable, being emotionally open. If you're already struggling with emotional regulation and alexithymia, the kind where you can't always identify or articulate what you're feeling, being expected to be emotionally vulnerable during intimate moments can feel overwhelming. You might shut down. You might perform the physical aspects while being emotionally walled off. She feels the distance and interprets it as you not letting her in, not trusting her, not being fully committed. You're just trying to manage the overwhelm of having to be emotionally online when your brain is already working overtime to manage everything else. The hyper-focus flip side can be its own problem. When you're in the novelty phase, when you're intensely focused on this person, your sexual attention and engagement is probably great. Maybe too great. Maybe you want intimacy more frequently than she does. Maybe your intensity about this aspect of the relationship makes her feel like that's all you care about. Then the novelty fades, and your hyperfocus moves to something else, and suddenly the pattern reverses. Now you're not initiating. Now you seem less interested. Now she's confused about the shift and taking it personally. You're just following where your ADHD attention naturally goes, but she's experiencing it as inconsistency in desire and attraction, which feels destabilizing in a relationship. Here's what all of this adds up to. You're trying to maintain a relationship while managing attention deficits, executive dysfunction, working memory problems, time blindness, emotional dysregulation, rejection sensitivity, communication differences, routine disruption challenges, decision-making struggles, and sensory processing variability. That's not a complete list, but it's enough. You're doing all of that while also trying to hold down a job, manage your life, deal with your own mental health, and function as a human being. Neurotypical people are maintaining relationships with maybe 20% of that cognitive load. You're running at 150% capacity just to keep things at baseline functional. It's not sustainable. Something eventually breaks. Usually it's the relationship. And after it breaks, after you've been through this enough times, you make a logical calculation. Being single is easier. Being single means you only have to manage your own needs and your own systems. Being single means you're not constantly disappointing someone. Being single means you're not walking on eggshells wondering when the next memory failure or time blindness incident is going to damage things further. Being single means you don't have to explain yourself, or apologize for your brain, or wonder if you're too much or not enough. So you stay single, not because you want to be alone forever, not because you're not capable of love or commitment, but because the experience of trying to maintain a relationship with an ADHD brain in a neurotypical relationship framework has been so consistently difficult and painful that staying out of the game feels like self-preservation. Your family doesn't understand this. They see a guy who's smart and accomplished and they wonder why you can't find someone. They don't see the invisible obstacles. Your married friends don't understand it. They met their partners before they really knew what their ADHD challenges were. Or they have the kind of ADHD that manifests differently. Or they found someone unusually patient and understanding. Or they're struggling in their relationships too, but they're already locked in. The dating advice you get is useless because it's designed for neurotypical people. Just be yourself. Just be present. Just make her a priority. You are being yourself. That's the problem. You are trying to be present. Your brain won't cooperate. You are making her a priority. But your time blindness and working memory don't care about priorities. The truth that nobody wants to say out loud is that modern dating and relationship structures are built for neurotypical brains. They require consistent attention and memory, and time management and emotional regulation, and communication skills and decision-making abilities that neurotypical people have more natural access to. When you don't have natural access to those things, when you have to manually operate systems that work automatically for other people, the cognitive load becomes unsustainable. You're not failing at relationships because you're broken. You're struggling with relationships because you're trying to operate in a framework that wasn't designed with your neurology in mind. So what do you do with this information? First, you stop internalizing the narrative that your singleness is a personal failure. It's not. It's the predictable outcome of a mismatch between your neurological reality and relationship expectations. Second, you get real about what you actually need in a relationship. You need a partner who understands that your memory failures aren't about lack of care. You need someone who can work with your time blindness instead of taking it personally. You need someone who gets that your attention regulation is neurological, not a choice. You need someone who can appreciate that your emotional intensity is part of the package. Finding someone who meets those needs is rare. That's why you're single. Not because you're unlovable, but because the intersection of what you need and what most people can offer is small. Third, you have to decide if you're willing to do the work. And it is work. Managing a relationship with ADHD requires systems and strategies and often medication and therapy and constant conscious effort. You have to decide if the juice is worth the squeeze. For some guys, it is. They find someone who's worth the effort, and they build systems to manage their symptoms, and they communicate openly about their challenges, and they make it work. For other guys, the honest answer is that the effort required to maintain a relationship exceeds the benefit they get from having one, and staying single is a valid choice. Neither option is wrong, but you have to make that choice consciously instead of just defaulting to single because it's easier. If you're someone who wants a relationship but keeps ending up single, you have to get help with your ADHD. Not to fix yourself, but to build the infrastructure that lets you function in a relationship. That might mean medication. That might mean therapy focused on executive function skills and emotional regulation. That might mean coaching around time management and working memory strategies. That might mean couples therapy when you do find someone, so you can work through challenges with professional support. You can't willpower your way through neurological differences. You need tools. You also need to be honest with potential partners about your ADHD. Not on the first date, but early enough that they understand what they're signing up for. This is terrifying because it feels like revealing that you're defective. But the alternative is pretending to be neurotypical until you can't maintain the mask anymore, and then watching things fall apart when the real you shows up. The right person will hear about your ADHD and say, "Okay, what do you need from me to make this work?" The wrong person will hear about it and decide it's too much. Better to find that out early, and you need to give yourself permission to have requirements. You need a partner who can handle your communication style. You need someone who won't weaponize your memory failures. You need someone who understands that your routines aren't negotiable because they're what keep you functional. You need someone who can see your effort even when the outcomes aren't perfect. These aren't unreasonable requirements. They're essential compatibility factors. Settling for someone who can't meet these needs because you're afraid you won't find anyone else is a recipe for misery. The pattern of being single for years as an ADHD man isn't about you being fundamentally unsuited for relationships. It's about a specific set of neurological challenges intersecting with relationship structures that don't account for neurological diversity. It's about trying to run software designed for a different operating system. It's about the exhaustion of constantly managing invisible challenges while being judged by visible outcomes. It's about rejection, sensitivity making you afraid to try again after repeated failure. It's about the gap between what you can offer and what's expected being wider than most people can understand. You're single because dating and relationships are genuinely harder for you than they are for neurotypical people. Not a little bit harder, significantly, exhaustingly harder. Acknowledging that isn't making excuses, it's recognizing reality. And once you recognize reality, you can make informed choices about whether and how to pursue relationships in a way that accounts for your actual needs and limitations, instead of pretending those needs and limitations don't exist. You're not broken. The system isn't built for you. Those are two different things. And understanding the difference might be the first step toward either finding a relationship that actually works, or making peace with being single for reasons that have nothing to do with your worth as a person.